Right, okay, let's get started. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to attend the third webinar in our LT webinar series. For those that don't know, we're running a webinar each week centering on a different aspect of the LT platform, which lots of people are now taking up or using due to the COVID-19 situation. So before we start, just a bit of housekeeping around the Zoom application and introductions. So I am Tom Broughton. I'm the Customer Success Manager for Europe, and I'll be presenting today. And joining me as panelists on this call, we have Paula Croft, who's the Support Manager for Europe, and Marcus Hughes, who's the UK Team Leader for ADInstruments Europe. And they're both going to be helping answer questions from the Q&A function within Zoom. So hopefully you can all see towards the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a button that says Q&A. You can post your questions in there, and Paula and Marcus will do their best to answer while I'm presenting. And there'll also be a couple of very short intermissions, depending on how many questions we get, where we'll address some of the perhaps bigger questions or broader questions that may or may not get asked. We're going to be dismissing those questions, and then they're going to be addressed in the little mini Q&A break. So if you see your question has been put in the dismiss tab, that's because it's a broader question that we're going to address in those short little interludes. I'm just going to share my screen. Before we get started, I just want to point you at a few different resources that are available to help you better use the LT platform. I hope you can all see my screen. We do have a support page on our website, which has some really great getting started videos for you to make use of. We also have an online community. You can go to our blog and go to this web page here. I'll send all these links in a follow-up email after this webinar, and join up with other educators that are using LT to discuss ideas and how you're using the platform. You can also feedback to us directly within LT itself. So if you go to your user menu at the top right here, you can go to LT feedback and send us some feedback that comes through to lots of us involved in the LT platform. And finally, you can ask, obviously, our staff, you can ask me, you can ask our colleagues any questions that you might have, and we do our best to help. Okay, so today's webinar topic is, I'll mention that, of course, everybody is muted. You can't talk, and I'm going to post a few links in the chat to some previous webinars. So I'm going to mute the chat for the moment. So bear with me a sec while I do that. Just so we're not getting too much coming in and kind of drifting past those links. So I'm just going to mute the chat for the moment. Okay, so we're going to be talking about inviting students and managing their progress. So just to give you a bit of background on what I've already done here, I already have a course in LT configured, and I already have some content that has been published. So the first webinar in this series was looking at how you add and release material to your students. So I've already done that here. That's usually the first step. We don't want to be inviting our students to the LT platform if there's no material available, because you'll get emails from those students saying that they can't see anything. So you always want to have at least one bit of content ready and published for them prior to inviting them to the platform. So how do we bring our students into the LT platform? There are three main ways of adding your students in. Some are more commonly used than others. The first is probably the least commonly used, and that is LMS integration. So if your institute is Blackboard, Moodle, or Canvas, you can integrate that with LT. And one of the things that does is allows you to push a course from your LMS through and copy that into LT. So what that will do is it will create the course as a course in your LT instance. It will also pull across the student's credentials, specifically their email address, and it will also send an invitation out to those students, inviting them to complete their sign up to the LT platform. It's the least commonly used because it's a whole separate process you'll need to work through to perform the integration. I'm not going to be able to show that today. Otherwise, the other two methods of inviting your students are found within the student accounts menu within your course. So students must be invited on a course by course basis. If you invite students to one course and you have 4 courses, they'll only see the courses that they are invited to. So if I had 4 courses, I'd have to invite my set of students to each course separately. This is so that you can tailor the student's login experience. I only have the one course here though for simplicity's sake. So if we go to student accounts, just down here, the 4th menu option, this allows us to bring our students into LT. And you'll see I've already got some students here because I've pre-prepared some material. I've logged in as these students and completed some work for the student progress element. But I can freely add in additional students to the platform or to this course specifically within this menu. So the second method of inviting your students is individually. So this is ideal if you have a late sign up or you have 1 or 2 extra students that were missed off the list. You can click this gear menu up here. The gear menu is pretty ubiquitous to all the different menus in LT, and it often gives you additional contextual options for whatever menu you're in here. So if I click on this gear menu, you'll see the very first option is to add a student. So this is, like I said, this is ideal if you have 1 or 2 to add. It's not ideal if you want to add 300 or 400 students to your course. That would be laborious. But if I click on add student, I can enter their credentials here and then send them an invitation to the platform. Now, the only mandatory information is the student's email address. As hopefully you're aware, when you invite a student to LT, they will receive an invitation email where they'll need to confirm and finish setting up their account by defining a password, much like any website. When you first sign up, you get a kind of confirmation link through. The students will have to do that. And we'll see what that looks like shortly as I'm going to actually import some students in. The other aspects, the other fields within the student credentials are optional. You can leave them blank. And this section down here, we're going to look at shortly when I look at the mass import. And I can decide whether I want to send the students their invite as part of this edition or not. Again, I'm going to talk about that very shortly when we look at the mass import. Okay, so that's the second option. Again, probably more commonly used than the LMS, but only good for adding a few students that perhaps signed up late to the course or missed off the main list. The final and most popular option is to import a list of students into this course. And this is done via this import button here. So what LT is looking for is a comma separated value file. Semicolons as a separator is also acceptable for our European friends. We've edited that recently to accept semicolons to separate the students' details. But ultimately, you'll just need to create a CSV file. A lot of LMSs like Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle can generate these, containing at a minimum a column with the students' email addresses. So I've prepared one already. I'm just going to show you what it looks like before I import it. And hopefully it loads up here. So I've shown here the 5 columns that you can utilize. As I mentioned, the email column is mandatory. If the students can't be sent an invitation email, they can't set up their account. So I filled that in with some students here with their email addresses. The given name, family name, and student ID, these are all optional. I can just delete these columns if I want. If I don't, I've got them here just to show you the options. The column headings are required. and they must be written exactly as shown. If you misspell one of the headings, or you don't have a space in between the words, LT will return an error. And I've prepared an incorrectly formatted document, which I'll try and import shortly. So you can see that LT kind of tells you where the error is. So if you run into problems, you should be able to figure out how to rectify them just from the error message. The one column which is optional, but I really think is almost mandatory to some degree, is the section. The section is a tag for those students in the sense that you can filter by the section in pretty much any menu relating to students in the LT platform. At a bare minimum, if you put in their intake year, you can easily find those students that you need to clear off the system by searching for their intake year via sections. If you don't put their intake year in and you've got your year 3s leaving, but you've got all your year 1 and year 2s in there, and you can't tell who's who, you're going to have to manually pick through to delete those students that need to be cleared off the system. But if you can filter them by their section, you can pick out the intake year and then just mass delete those students. And I'll show you how this works once we import these students in. So I would say make use of the section. It's really useful in filtering every aspect of the student element of LT, whether that's the student progress, as we're going to see shortly, whether that's deleting students, as we're going to see shortly, or even when you are grading your students, which is going to be a future webinar with grading. You can show only those students in certain sections when you want to grade them. So it's a really nice filtering option. So I've saved a copy of this to my desktop, so I'm going to go ahead and import my student list. So let's click on import, and LT will tell you to find the CSV file. So I'm just going to open Windows Explorer, and I'm just going to go ahead and find my, oh, no, that's not what I want to do. Go ahead and find my students and click open. And assuming the document is in the correct format, you'll get this file read successfully, and you'll get a summary of what you're about to do. So you can see here that 4 students will be added to this course and 2 new sections will be created. I can also choose to send the invite to the students right now so they can finish signing up, or I can choose to send it at a later time. Now, the important thing to note is once students are invited into an LT instance, they no longer need to confirm the invitation when you add them to a new course. So once you've signed up, if you were to invite your students to a second course, if they just log in, they'll see that course automatically, assuming they've finished setting up their account for the first course. So in effect, after the students have set themselves up, you no longer actually need to send the invite email, although it can act as a nice notification telling them that they've got access to a new course. When the students log in, they'll just see the new course they've been added to, assuming they were already on the system and set up their account. But I am going to send the invites, as these are new students, they're not in my instance, so they have to log in and set up their account. So I'm going to click import. And we'll now see that we have these 4 additional students showing in my LT course. And I'm hopefully going to get the invites will be coming into my inbox, so we'll take a look there shortly. But I'm just going to go ahead and import an incorrectly formatted file just to show you the error that I get. So I'll go to browse, and I'm going to find the document that I prepared, which is this one. And you'll see that I get this file is invalid error message, and it actually tells unrecognized header student ID found on line 1, and that's because I haven't got a space between student and ID. LT is very specific in the column headings. This is probably one of the most common errors that we see, is just accidentally mistyping or not putting a space in. LT needs that, and it'll tell you if it can't read the file properly and where the problem is. So it's pretty nice Right, let's just go into my email and give it a refresh. And we now have our student invitations. So let's go in here and just see what it looks like. So you get notified that you've been invited to a specific instance. So this would be your institute, and gives the students the name of the course that they've been invited to. And they click confirm invitation here, and they'll be asked to set a password and sign in. So it's all really straightforward. Just bear in mind that these emails can be put in the spam folder. They can also be blocked by some university email filters. So if they're hard bounced, if IT says that they're getting sort of emails from .com, this email address here, that they're rejecting, then they'll need to allow these to go through. Yeah, and again, just a reminder, just post any questions you have in the Q&A panel at the bottom of the Zoom window. You can type in there if you have any questions. Okay, so let's go back in and let's take a look at some of the filtering options we now have within this student accounts menu. So once you've invited your students, the student accounts menu allows you to manage those student accounts and perform a few different actions depending on what you want to do. So the first thing you can do is filter students by their status. So I can show students that are active, i.e. they've accepted their invites, or I can show all those students that are pending, i.e. they haven't accepted their invite. Now, these student accounts that I've just added are already signed up elsewhere, hence they're not showing as pending. So you can easily pick out those students that have not accepted their invite. And one really nice thing you can do is when you filter your students, you can click this little checkbox at the top and it highlights all of those that meet the filtering criteria. And in the gear menu, I have some additional options that I can do with these students. So I can send them their invites. So this is really useful if certain students say they haven't got their invite. Well, I can say, you know, I get an email from student 51 here saying that they haven't got their invite. Well, I can click them and I go to the gear menu and I can send the invitation, or I can highlight them all and I can resend the invites to all those students. I can also export the list of students that's currently being selected here as a spec out as a CSV. So I find if I want to re-import that and I don't have the original list, rather than regenerating it, you can just have LT generate it and import that into a new course. I can also get student emails. This is a really nice little feature. So I can filter the students, so I could find those that are pending. I know I don't have any that haven't accepted their invite, but I can then get student emails, which will capture all of their email addresses. I can then copy that and I could write them a specific email, just paste it into my email client and notify them that they need to make sure they accept their invite so that they can do the material that's required. So I can very quickly and easily target those students that have not signed in or haven't signed up to the LT platform, just give them a little nudge. But this is coming from you rather than from LT, so they're more likely to read that. Okay. And I also have the ability to filter by sections. So for those students that have a section assigned, when you import students, if there's a section that doesn't exist, it will create those students as a section. So you can see here that I can filter my students out by that section tag. So I can target those that, you know, let's say in 2 years time, my 2019 students are going to be leaving. So I can simply go into the student accounts, search for their tag, highlight them all, and I can delete them from this course. So this is a really easy way of clearing your students out of courses. Just by simply having the intake year allows you to pick out those students in 3 years' time and swiftly delete them. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty hard for me to say which students are from which intake year. I'm going to have to manually work through their names and clear them off the system. Now, it's important to note that when you delete students in this way, they're not permanently gone, nor is their work. They will move into a deleted section in this deleted accounts option down here. You can click on deleted accounts and you can restore that student and all their work within that course if desired. So the important thing is they don't count towards your seat limit if you have that type of functionality. Okay, so Marcus got a really good question that I can answer everyone. So I'll stop in a few minutes after I've done this bit and I'll address that question. So thanks for that, Marcus. So just a few other little bits in here. As I said, you can filter by section. You can also send the invites from here en masse again. So I highlight my students and resend the invite. I can also manage my sections. So if I click on manage sections, it shows me all of my sections. I can go in here and I can clear this section if I want to remove that and assign those students to a different section. Or I can click new here and I can design a new section manually. So sections can be created by the import process, or they can be manually set up within the accounts menu here as well. Okay. So the student accounts menu is used to import your students and subsequently manage their access to the LT platform and ultimately allow you to clear them from the LT platform. So I'm going to take a brief break now just to address any of the questions in the Q&A section. Marcus said there's a really nice one in there. So I'm going to take a look at that in the dismiss section. Can I add a section information later? So, yeah, so hopefully I'm going to reopen that. Hopefully I've already addressed that. So yes, so as you saw there, if I add my students in, but I forgot to define a section, I can, what I could do is, let's say I import 200 students and I realize that, I forgot to add the section. What you could do, rather than doing as I did there and manually creating the section in LT and then having to go to each individual student and assign them to that section, you'll see that if I click on a student, I can change their section. But if you had 200 students, you'd have to do that 200 times. I'm pretty sure you don't want to do that. What you could instead do is take your original CSV file and format it so that you do have the section in, save that as a CSV file, and then import that list back into your course. Now, LT is smart enough that if I import a list and some of those students already exist, no duplicates will be created, but any of their details will be updated. So in that situation, I'll demonstrate here. What I would do, assuming I had no section, here's my original CSV file. If I then configure it so that I have a section, I save this, I re-import that list, those students, because they're already on my course, will instead be updated. Similarly, if you get a second list that has some missing students and you re-import that list, but there's no changes to the details of those existing students, the import process will tell you that there are some duplicates that will just be skipped. So yeah, you can re-import the CSV file having reformatted it, and it'll update your student credentials. So yeah, good, right. Okay, so that's the first element of this webinar. Inviting students. They're on my course. they've accepted their invites, they've started accessing their material. So what options do I have to monitor and manage the progress of my students as they work through the content that I have provided them with? So the first step, first option, is the dashboard for your course. So when you click on course at the left-hand side here, as well as seeing the 6 menus on the right, you will see your kind of overview dashboard, your student progress overview dashboard on the right-hand side here. So this gives you an at-a-glance overview of activity of students on your different lessons and modules within LT. So the students that I already had on the platform prior to inviting that second set have started working through the material. And we can see at the top here, we get a sum of how many students have accepted our invites. You can see that all 8 students are set up. We can see how many lessons have their marks released. Again, we're going to cover grading in a separate webinar, but you can see at a glance how many of these have their marks released to students. And I can also see an at-a-glance progress of each module and lesson within those modules. So here's my cardiovascular systems module, and there are 3 lessons, 3 components to this module: heart dissection, blood vessel histology, and circulatory system. We can see that for heart dissection, we have 1 student who's in progress, i.e. they have started the lesson, but they haven't completed it. We have 2 students that have committed. Committed is our way of the students finishing that particular set of content. They hit a button at the end that commits their work. And we have 5 students that haven't actually started. And you'll see that for the other 4 elements, none of the students have started them. I can also do this by student instead. So if I click on students, I then see a list of my students at the left-hand side and their progress of those students for each of the lessons that I have available. So you can see that student 51 is one of the ones that has completed the heart dissection lab. Student 52 is one that's still in progress. 53 hasn't started. 54 has also committed. So this is just an at-a-glance view of the progress that your students are making within the material. You'll also notice at the top, I can filter by their section as well. So I can see how well my Biology 2019 students are doing. I can see how well my engineering students are doing. My 2020 students haven't started anything yet, so they'll just show that they're all not started. But we have far more granular options within the student progress menu found under student work. So student work, this is really where you're going to be going a lot of the time once students are in and begin using LT. A lot of the other menus here, lessons and modules, is all about designing the content and then releasing it. Student accounts is about inviting your students so they have access. Once that's all done, a lot of the majority of the work happens in the student work menu here. I like to say that's where all the magic happens. A lot of the functionality and a lot of the powerful day-to-day management tools are found within student work. So if I click on this, it'll then show me a list of all of my published material. So hopefully you saw earlier, I had 2 modules, one of which had 3 lessons, one of which had 2 lessons. So if I want to monitor the progress of students, I have to choose a module, or a standalone lesson if it's not part of a module, and choose the one that I want to track the progress for and manage. And then I click on student progress, which is the second menu, second option within my individual lessons menu card here. And this will allow me to manage the students' day-to-day interaction with this specific lesson. So there's a lot of things you can do in here. Just like in the student accounts menu, I can filter out students, but instead of whether they've accepted their LT platform or not, I can filter those that have not started it. I can filter those that have that are in progress. I can filter those that have committed. I can filter those that have an extension and show them within my list. So I can also do this by section as well. So again, that section carries through to the student work menu and the student progress submenu here. And I can filter my students out, so I can find my biology 2020 and see who's not started. I can see my engineering students and see who's not started. I can pick those out. In case you're wondering why the other sections don't appear, I refer you to the very first webinar we did, which was publishing and releasing material. You can release content to some sections and not others. By default, because I create a new section, those students aren't automatically assigned to access the modules that I have. I'd have to go into availability and release it to them, in case you're wondering why those sections don't appear. Content has to be released individually for each section if you're choosing to segment your students in that way. But what I can really do here, and what's a really nice option, again, you'll see that I have this gear menu as well. Again, pretty ubiquitous on every menu, pretty much in LT. Gives me additional options. And the one option I get here is to get student emails, just like in the student accounts menu. And this, whilst only being one option, is one of the most powerful options you have available. I can see that these students haven't started this material. I've filtered them by not started. I don't want to harass or speak to the ones that are working on it or have completed it. It's these ones that haven't engaged that are at risk. You know, they're engaging with the material. I want to make sure that they do. So I'm going to grab their emails. And just like with the student account section, I can paste this into my email client. I can then send these students a specific email saying, you know, I can see you haven't started the material. You really need to be working through this by this specific date or deadline. Please make sure you do. I'm able to track activity and I can see that you haven't started. You can send them a, you know, fairly gentle reminder. Well, it depends how gentle you want to be. Targeting these students, telling them that, you know, you can see they're not engaged. They need to make sure they engage. So it's a really powerful option, allowing you to find those students that are not engaging and try and give them a bit more attention so that they do engage the material. And there's some additional options within the general student progress menu. So you can see that I've got all my students listed here. There is a button at the top that says reset all progress. Now, this is one of the few permanent deletes in LT. What reset all progress does is it deletes all of the students' work within this lesson and effectively forces them to start again. Now, what situations would you use this? Probably the most common one is, and it's something you should try and avoid, is you release a lesson, students start working on it, but you then publish an updated version of the lesson where you've corrected an error or you've added some missing content in, or you know, you left a draft page in, you realized, oh, actually, I left that in, I should probably finish that and then let the students have it. Resetting all progress means that those students that were locked into the old version will be able to access the new version. But please bear in mind that it is a permanent action. It can't be undone when you do this. It outright deletes the students' work for that lesson. So please use with caution. The other options I have are on an individual student level. So you'll notice that I can click on each student's name as desired. There's also a search bar here, so I can search for a student by name as well if I want to go down that granularly, be able to pick out an individual student. And when I click on that student, I will get some additional options. Now, the options that are presented depend on the student's current status within that lesson. So for student 51, they've committed this lesson. So they've clicked the commit button, they said, yes, I'm finished, I'll lock the lesson because I don't need to work on it anymore. You'll therefore see that the options I get are to uncommit the student. This undoes the commit. Doesn't affect any of their work, but they'll be able to log in and access the lesson and continue making changes. I also have the option to reset the progress of this specific student if I want to, rather than doing it globally here. So if there was one student that happened to start the old version, they were really keen, you released a newer version of the lesson, they were locked into the old version, you could reset this student's progress and they could then access the new version. So the options that appear here depend on where the student is in this lesson. You'll also notice I get a summary of their status here. You can see they're committed on the 14th of April at 1:27 p.m. And if I really want to, I can view student work just here. So this allows me to effectively view the entire lesson, but I'll see that student's answers and that student's work within that lesson. So here's the lesson. I can just hop in, and I think it's a few pages in that I actually start as anything to engage with initially. Yeah, here we go. So here's the work that the student's done. So I can just jump in if there's a particular student who you want to keep track of, you know, again, those ones that have additional sort of learning needs or are sort of at risk or don't really engage, you can kind of hop in and see what they're doing if you really want to. It's up to you. But that option is generally available for pretty much every student state, every status within the lesson. So let's have a look at some of the other options that I have available. If I look at some of my other students, we have student 52 here. They are in progress, so there's obviously no kind of commit time. I have the reset progress option here again, but because the student hasn't actually committed, I can force commit them by clicking on this commit button. So this will lock the lesson for that specific student as if they'd clicked the commit button. And you'll see that I say, and they had an extension, so ending the extension will commit the lesson for that student. So I can commit that student, and you'll see that the option then changes to uncommit. So the options you get in here are always valid for the student's current state. You're never going to be uncommitting a student that hasn't committed. You can't commit a student that's already been committed. This button always adjusts depending on where they're at within the lesson. So some really nice student tracking options here. Being able to tell exactly, be able to filter out those students by whether they've started, whether they've committed, whether they have an extension, and be able to filter by sections. So you're only picking out those students that are relevant. If you're in charge of the biology course, you can just filter out your biology students rather than seeing the engineering ones as well. That's why the section is just so useful in LT. Okay. I think that was pretty much all I was going to cover in this webinar. So just once you've got your material ready, inviting your students and then tracking their progress on a day-to-day basis. So we've got a bit of time for Q&A before we wrap up. I can see there's a question in here. So we've got a dismissed question here. So I'm going to reopen the dismissed question and I'll address the other question that's in there as well. So let's just take a look here. Oh, just have a look. So sorry, I don't know why that's been clicked as answered. I'll answer it live, sorry, in the answered tab here. So students assigned to a different course remain separated from students from another course. So I won't see them all together when looking at their progress. Yeah, that's correct. So student progress is on a course by course basis. When I'm looking at my progress here, I'm looking at their progress in the anatomy and physiology course. If there was another course that same set of students was in, I'd have to go into that course to see their progress within the content within that course. There's not as yet an overarching global view of your instance that shows you progress across the whole instance. No, that's not currently possible. How to handle the lesson students work together or individually, how to define and manage these work groups. For example, the practical study has to be performed by the group of 4 students. When it comes to grouping students up for material, you very much need to use the group login. Within, there's a few that are showing us. Yeah, I've got it. That's fine. So if you want students to group up, the grouping isn't really directly shown in the student progress. It's more in the grading element that the groupings work. If you look at the students' work, they'd have the same commit time if they committed as a group. They'd have the same progress within that specific lesson. In terms of them actually defining the groups, this has to be done via the login page. So if I just log out here, students will want to have mutually shared answers as they would in a lab setting. You want them all to be logged in together so that all the work they record in the lab is saved to each student's account so they can work on it at home individually. You have to use the group login tab on the login page. Now, the key thing here is they have to all log in on this machine. No kind of login provision where I log in on my laptop, someone else logs in on their laptop. Now, in terms of doing it in this situation, if you want students to group up, but the students are individually isolated at home, you could do something as we're doing now, use a video conferencing package. One student sets up a Zoom meeting and shares their screen. All the other group members join. They then give mouse control over to each of the other remote students, and they enter their credentials one at a time in here, and they log in. And effectively, because one student's logged in with all 4 logins on their computer, and all the other students are viewing that through your video conferencing facility, like Zoom, effectively they could work on it as a group together if that's what you wanted them to do. So it is possible. It's a bit of an inelegant workaround, but you could just use mouse and keyboard control to have the students enter their credentials on one specific student's computer via video conferencing. And we had a good few other questions here. So I answered that live. Is it possible to uncommit all the students at once? Yes, it is. So the kind of committing and uncommitting, you probably noticed there that the only global option, I need to be in a single login there. The only global option for the students was to reset their progress. That's because the committing and uncommitting en masse is actually part of the availability submenu. Sorry, I need to think about what my password is for a second. So it's in there that you will do the mass uncommit. So I'm happy to show you that. So if I go to student work and I go to my module, I go to the lesson that I want to mass uncommit, rather than going to student progress, I go to availability, and I can make available to all. This will uncommit any students that have committed. And conversely, I can manually commit all students as an admin commit. This is kind of covered in the very first webinar that my colleague in the US did, looking at publishing and availability. Yeah, but it's actually in the availability tab because it's more access rather than progress, if you think of it that way. If I make available to all, that is effectively a mass uncommit for that lesson for all students in my sections. Okay. So just a few other little bits. I am just going to open up the chat. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second. I just need to copy a link or two. Bear with me a second. So I've taken the liberty of grabbing I've just posted a couple of links in the chat, which are links to the previous two webinars. So we have the first one, which is publishing and setting content availability, and the second one, which was configuring and enabling example data in LT. And this webinar will also go up on the same site once we've processed the video and edited it a little bit. But otherwise, I'm just going to reiterate a few other little bits here. Again, reiterate some good sources of help are the send feedback through the LT user menu here, and our website. You can also speak to us on the LT community. Again, you could just go to, I'll post this address in the chat as well, so that people can capture it for themselves. And finally, asking us at ADInstruments how we can help. The final thing I want to do, we have a couple of polls that it'd be great if you could just answer. So it's just really getting an idea of where you are at in your journey. So just generally with LT, and also about inviting and managing students. So I'm just going to launch that now. It'd be great if you could just take a few minutes or a couple of seconds really, just to fill out where you're at. So there's a little, should be a little polls bar at the bottom of your Zoom window now that will allow you to vote on where you're at. That'll be fantastic. Really great for us to know where people are currently at with LT, so we know what we can, what kind of material and support is needed in future. That was sort of that we scheduled for this webinar. If you want to post some more questions in the Q&A, I've got plenty of time. Please feel free to do that now. We'll be happy to address those questions. Otherwise, thank you for attending. I think we addressed all the questions that were raised. Again, feel free to ask some now. Otherwise, if there are some that we can't answer now, we'll contact you directly, but I can't see any that we haven't already answered. So I'll just enable chat again now. So if you have any more kind of general things you want to say, you can do so. So that's now unlocked as well. And thanks for everyone who's already answered the poll. That's going to be really helpful for us. I'm going to leave it open for a couple more minutes. Yeah. Otherwise, please feel free to type in the chat, type in the Q&A as desired. Stay online for a couple more minutes, and then we'll close the polling, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you. So we have a question here. So can a CSV file be generated using Excel? Yes, typically when you go to save the file or go to export, I don't use Excel directly. I use something else, but there should be the option to download or save it as a CSV file specifically. It's a pretty general option that most spreadsheet type programs should have. When I do it in Google Sheets, I just go to File, Download, and I can choose CSV as format. It should be within the Save As option, not just Export. And it should give you some different file types. One of it should be CSV. So I'm just going to leave the poll open for 30 more seconds, and then I'm going to close it, and I'll end the meeting a minute or so shortly after that, unless some more questions pop up in Q&A. Oh, so I'm sorry there, Ian. I can see you've asked a question there. Probably won't do it in the Q&A, so if you have it, I don't miss it. But is there an example CSV file available? I can certainly send the one that I just showed in the webinar as part of the follow-up email. I'll make a note just to attach that as part of the follow-up. It's pretty standardized, but yeah, I'll make a note there. Okay, so I'm going to keep the meeting open for the next 30 seconds. If you have any final questions, I'll extend it beyond the 30 seconds, of course, if there's a question asked, but otherwise I'll then end the meeting. Okay, right, no further questions, I think. So thank you very much for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.